good morning, everybody. Thank you guys for joining us for another episode of Breakfast by the Bay. So we're going to hang out for a few seconds as our friends and family and students log on to check our episode. If you guys are hearing and seeing us okay, let us know in the comment section that the audio and visual is looking good. But while we wait for some of our guests, we have some clues as to what we're going to be talking about for our episode. So we have a couple of nests by some birds that we're going to be learning about. So this is an example of an osprey nest. You can see they build their nest primarily of sticks and their eggs. These are not a real osprey egg, but it's a model. You can see it's about the same size as an osprey egg would be and the same color patterns. We also have our mute swan nest. You can see they have absolutely massive eggs here, and they use kind of dry grasses and hays, straw, reed grasses to make their nests. And our last nest that we're checking out is a great blue heron's nest. You can see their beautiful blue eggs there. Alright, so I think we're having an audience that's shown up. Does everybody hear and see everything through their screen okay? I'm going to get started. So, my name is Jeff, and I'm joined by Miss Megan behind the camera, and we are broadcasting to you live from our Bay Center in Providence, Rhode Island. And we're super excited to be talking, if you haven't figured out from our nest, all about birds today. So we're going to talk about what makes a bird, and we're going to be talking about some common species of birds that you can find in Rhode Island and all along Narragansett Bay. So I want to give a special shout out to 11th Hour Racing for sponsoring our Season 2 of Breakfast by the Bay. And if you guys haven't yet, it would be a huge help if you would like and subscribe to both our Facebook and YouTube channels. Awesome. All right, so let's jump into our bird lesson here. So the first thing I want to talk about is what makes a bird a bird. So there are some characteristics that help to classify a bird. One thing that all birds have is they are vertebrates, which means they have a backbone. Birds are also covered in feathers, so those feathers have different functions. They can have down feathers to keep them warm, or flight feathers to help them fly. Birds are also endothermic, which is a very fancy scientific word of saying warm-blooded, which means they're able to regulate their own body temperature. So no matter what the temperature of their surroundings, they are still warm on the inside of their body. And of course, all birds have a beak, so their mouth, which helps them to eat their food. And we have a few examples of some different bird beaks from different species of birds. So by checking out bird beaks, it's a really good way of figuring out what that bird eats and how it spends its life. So for instance, if you check out a raptor here, we're going to be meeting the osprey, which is a type of raptor bird. They have these really sharp beaks with the hook at the end for pulling apart the flesh of their prey. And we have an example of a fruit-eating bird like this toucan. Has that really strong bill so it can crush through fruits and seeds and nuts. You guys might recognize a nectar-feeding bird like our hummingbird down here, where its beak is designed to fit right inside a flower. So depending on the form and function of their beak, you can tell a lot about the diet and life cycle or lifestyle of these different birds. Awesome. All right, so all birds, actually not all birds, but most birds also have hollow bones. So that's very helpful for them if they want to fly. Humans, we have solid bones. We're way too heavy. Our skeleton's way too heavy in order to take flight. But birds, in order to fly, they have to figure out ways to stay lightweight. And one of those things that helps them fly is having hollow bones. And I said not all birds have hollow bones because not all birds have the ability to fly. For example, penguins are really good at swimming and diving, and penguins actually do not have hollow bones. They have solid bones like humans to help them dive and swim underwater. Alright, but all birds are oviparous, which is another fancy science word for meaning that they lay eggs. I'm sure you guys have all seen a chicken egg before, right? So chickens are birds, and they have that hard calcium shell on the outside to protect their young that are growing inside those eggs. And all birds have a very unique respiratory system, so the way that they breathe. So birds breathe air, they take oxygen out of the air just like humans. So they have lungs but they also have lots of different air sacs that are attached to their lungs, so different pockets where the air gets cycled through. And that's another way to keep them lightweight to help them fly. Awesome. So in order to be a bird, you need to be classified with all of these unique characteristics. And now I think we are ready to check out some common species of birds that you can find in Narragansett Bay and Rhode Island. So we're going to pan over to some really good pictures that we have here. So the first bird species I want to talk about is one of my favorites, an osprey. So ospreys are very large hawks, and despite their size, they actually have slender, long, narrow wings and long legs. And when they're flying, they have this really marked kink in their wings. So you can check out this osprey that's soaring through the sky here, and it kind of makes that M shape. You can kind of see the shape of their wings makes that letter M pattern. It's a really good way to identify ospreys that might be circling in the sky overhead. So these guys are pretty large birds. They are smaller than a bald eagle, but they are larger than a red-tailed hawk. On average, they're about 2 feet long and can weigh about 4 pounds, and their wingspan is about 6 feet. So wingspan means when their wings are fully outstretched, from wingtip to wingtip, it measures about 6 feet long, which is pretty much how tall I am. So their wingspan is really large. If we check out the color pattern of some of their feathers, you'll notice they are brown on the top of their body and have white feathers underneath. And their head has a lot of white feathers with this broad brown stripe of feathers that's kind of going through their eye. So osprey are excellent at catching fish. You might have seen them circling high in the sky over relatively shallow water or during low tide. And what they'll do is they'll hover briefly and then they'll dive feet first to grab a fish. So you can check out those really sharp talons on their feet. What they'll do is they'll grab that fish, and as they fly away, they're actually smart enough, they'll rotate the fish in their talons so that the fish is face first, which makes them more aerodynamic as they fly back to their nest or perch to enjoy their meal. You can pretty much find osprey around nearly any body of water, including salt marshes, rivers, ponds, reservoirs, estuaries, and even coral reefs. These guys build very conspicuous stick nests. So we're zooming in there, you can see their nests are almost entirely made out of sticks, and you can find those nests usually placed out in the open. Lots of times they're on top of poles or channel markers or dead trees, somewhere close or even over the water. And a lot of studies have been shown to study just how excellent of an angler ospreys are. Some studies show that ospreys can catch a fish in 1 out of every 4 dives. And other studies have shown success rates as high as 70%. So they think on average, an osprey will catch a fish in about 12 minutes of hunting, which is really extraordinary. And these guys are a migratory species of bird. So they only enjoy Narragansett Bay during the warm summer months. And in the winter, they migrate down to Central and South America. So they can live for about 15 to 20 years. And over that lifetime, they can log about 160,000 migration miles as they travel back and forth. All right, let's move on to our second species of birds that we're going to talk about. The next species is the herring gull, and I'm sure you guys have all seen these birds before, especially if you've been to the beach. They're a very large gull with a big hefty bill and robust bodies. And they're one of 3 really common species of gulls in Rhode Island. There's also the ring-billed gull, which is a little bit smaller than the herring gull. And then the great black-backed gull, which is the largest gull species that we have. But these herring gulls are usually about 2 feet long, weigh between 2 and 3 pounds, and have a wingspan of about 4 feet 9 inches. If you check out the color pattern, you'll notice that they have light gray feathers on their back with black wingtips and white feathers on their head. But they actually take 4 years to reach this adult plumage or coloration. So when herring gulls are first born, they're usually a mottled brown color. by their second year, they start to grow some gray feathers on their back. And by the third year, they're starting to add some white feathers on their head. And eventually, by their fourth year, they'll look like this herring gull, complete adult plumage. And no matter what their age, they always have these dull pink legs. You can check out their legs with their webbed feet. But these guys love to patrol the shorelines and open oceans. They usually are picking scraps off the surface, and lots of times they can be found rallying around fishing boats or even dumpsters. They're very loud and competitive scavengers and are very happy to steal a meal from another bird. And I'm sure if you've been at the beach with some snacks before, they might have even tried to steal some of your food. But you can find herring gulls all along the coast, near large reservoirs, lakes, major rivers, and they feed in very diverse habitats such as the open water, mud flats, plowed fields, and even garbage dumps. All right, a fun fact about herring gulls is they actually have a bit of a sibling rivalry problem. So usually the third chick in the herring gull clutch can have it really rough. Usually the first two chicks hatch on the same day, while the third chick is born a day or two later. And that third chick usually weighs less, gets less food, and even grows slower than some of its older siblings. All right, we're going to move on to our third species of bird that's very common around Narragansett Bay, and that is the double-crested cormorant. So these double-crested cormorant are a very large water bird. They kind of have a really small head, but a long kinked neck, and then they have a thin, strongly hooked bill. So there's another species of cormorant known as the great cormorant that's also found in Rhode Island, and the double-crested cormorant's a little smaller than the great cormorant. These guys are usually about 3 feet long, weigh about 5 pounds, with a wingspan of about 4 feet. Adults are usually brownish black feathers and have a small patch of yellow-orange skin on their face. These guys are usually floating low on the surface of water and are really excellent at diving to catch fish. So they're really better at swimming than they are at flying. And what they'll do is after they dive down under the water to catch their fish, they'll swallow it whole. And then before they're able to fly, they actually have to dry their feathers off. So lots of times you'll see them standing on docks or on rocks or tree limbs with their wings spread out. And what they're doing is actually drying off their feathers. So most birds have a special oil that coats their feathers to keep them waterproof, but cormorants don't have that oil. So by not having that oil, they can get completely waterlogged, which makes it better at swimming, but a lot more difficult to fly. These guys are actually one of the most widespread species of cormorants in all of North America, and they are also the one that's most frequently seen in freshwater habitats. All right, let's move on to our fourth species here. And this makes move into our next bird that we're going to talk about, which is the mute swan. So this is a very beautiful bird. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen it. It's a very large waterfowl. They have these big, heavy bodies and short, little stubby legs. And they have this long, slender neck that's held in that graceful S shape. They also have a really big, flat bill that has a bit of a knob at the base to it. And these guys are among one of the largest of all waterfowl. They are usually about 5 feet long, can weigh over 30 pounds, and have a wingspan of over 7 feet. So absolutely incredible wingspan. Once they stretch out those wings from tip to tip, can be up to 7.5 feet long. But these guys spend most of their time floating on the water, and they feed on all the vegetation that grows in shallow water. So you'll see them dip their head down using that long neck to pull up any vegetation that's growing below. And lots of times you'll see them sticking their butts up in the air as they tip their bodies trying to get more of that food. These guys are also a really aggressive species of bird. They don't like having to share their habitats with other birds and even humans. And lots of times you'll see them with their wings in a half-raised display trying to ward off any intruders that are getting too close to them. But these guys, you can look for them in city park ponds, as well as rivers, lakes, and of course estuaries like Narragansett Bay. And believe it or not, mute swans are actually an invasive species. So all of the mute swans that are in North America actually descended from swans that were imported from Europe. So in the mid-1800s and early 1900s, a lot of Europeans would bring these swans over to adorn large estates or city parks and zoos. They thought they looked so beautiful that they need to bring them over to North America. And another fun fact about mute swans is most of them will actually mate for life. So once they have their partner, they'll have the same partner every breeding season. All right, the last bird we want to check out is the great blue heron. So these guys kind of look like a big dinosaur. But they are the largest of all heron species in North America. They have these really long, skinny legs, that long neck, and a really sharp, thick dagger bill that they use to spearfish with. Their head, chest, and wing plumage usually has a bit of a shaggy appearance. And when they're flying, they usually tuck their neck into this tight S shape to make them more aerodynamic. So these guys are usually about 4.5 feet long. They can weigh between 5 and 6 pounds. And they have a wingspan of about 5.5 to 6.5 feet. So they get their name because they appear to be bluish gray from a distance. And they have this wide black stripe over their eye. When they're flying, you'll also notice that the upper side of their wing is actually two-toned. It's pale on the forewing and a little bit darker on their flight feathers. And so these guys are also really great hunters. What they'll do is they'll slowly walk or wade out into shallow water, and then they'll stand very still like a statue, and they'll wait for any small fish or other prey to get close enough to them, and then with lightning fast speed, they'll thrust their head and neck towards their prey, using their really sharp beak to spear their food, and then they'll swallow it whole. You can find great blue herons in saltwater and freshwater habitats. They've been known to be in open coasts, salt marshes, riverbanks, lakes, and sometimes even people's backyards. So if people have goldfish or koi ponds, sometimes great blue herons will stop by and get some free snacks. And a fun fact about great blue herons is in the northeastern United States and southern Canada, the great blue herons have actually benefited from the recovery of beaver populations. So beavers, as they divert major waterways, they create a patchwork of swamps and meadows. And these new swamps and meadows are perfectly suited for foraging grounds and nesting grounds for our great blue herons. All right, so that's all I have to talk about for our common species of birds around Narragansett Bay and Rhode Island. And do we have any questions from our friends or audience at home?
No questions today.
No questions. Awesome. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed learning all about birds today with me and Miss Meg. And definitely come check us out next Wednesday, same place, same time, 10 a.m. Awesome. Thank you guys.